A reckoning is coming for people who drive like maniacs in the name of attention, clout, rebellion, or even just simple thrills. And I could stomach it if the reckoning was limited to the driver. You know, fines, taking away the license, restitution if property is destroyed, or even jail time if people got hurt. But the consequences are now being extended to the cars themselves. And I don't like that. I don't like it at all. You see, barely a week ago from the time of this video's release, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department demolished a 2009 Infiniti G37S and a 2007 Nissan 350Z that they'd seized as part of their arrests for illegal street racing. And what's wild to me is that it was all a clear, unambiguous slice of administrative theater, because they didn't just do this behind the closed gates of the nearest junkyard. No, they called a press conference to let everybody know that they respect these vehicles so little that they're not even interested in recouping some revenue for the force by selling them at auction. And yet, for as grotesque as this display is, once you hear the rationale behind destroying these cars and the new law that supports them doing this, it sort of becomes clear that it's time for certain parts of the automotive enthusiast community to grow up.
We can rant if we want to. We can send our best regards, because your friends don't rant, and if they don't rant, then they're not into cars.
Alright, so on June 17th, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Sheriff Kevin McMahill and Clark County Commissioner Marilyn Kirkpatrick held a press conference at a recycling center in order to make a spectacle out of crushing a 2009 Infiniti G37S and a 2007 Nissan 350Z that, once again, were confiscated as a result of illegal activities. In the case of the Infiniti, the driver was part of an active street takeover where he was caught drifting harder than Takumi Fujiwara, nearly taking out spectators and other cars alike, which, on the scale of automotive-related offenses, ranks above content creators who destroy cars for views like they're in a Street Fighter bonus level, but ranks below content creators who introduce themselves as ya boy. The Nissan, meanwhile, was doing Nissan-related foolishness like fleeing from law enforcement after getting caught engaging in trick driving exhibitions. Hilariously enough, the Nissan driver reportedly tried to change the car's appearance to escape the law, but it obviously didn't take, and it just has me imagining them going to a pay and spray at a 5-star wanted level, while the cop is staring right at them. Of course, if the perpetrators are already in custody, why are we destroying these cars? Well, as it turns out, this little stunt was intended to bring public awareness to a new law that would not only make this type of destruction mandatory in Las Vegas, but also kind of inevitable. According to Fox 5 Vegas, a piece of legislation sponsored by Assemblywoman Linda Hunt, not that Linda Hunt, would allow police to, quote, confiscate vehicles used in street racing and destroy them if they cannot pass a safety inspection. End quote. Now, anyone familiar with street racing knows that those cars are going to be modded so extensively that the likelihood of their passing inspection is on the same level of possibility as a toddler passing a law school entrance exam. But what gets me is that the law is expansive enough to include cars used in other felony acts, so that presumably, even if they do pass inspection, they would still be destroyed, which really just feels like throwing the baby out with the Amsoil-infused bathwater. Think about all the things they could do with these cars rather than simply destroying them. They could have been used in training exercises for first responders to test out rescue equipment, I suppose in their destroyed state they still could be, since it's not like you would test out the jaws of life on a car that doesn't look like a crushed can of LaCroix. But even if you don't give them to local emergency services, you could still easily have donated them to like a trade school or something. I'm sure they could always use donor cars for students to wrench on. Hell, even without donating, you could have reverted these to stock and auctioned them off to put money back into the community. Or maybe like use them as part of a charity auction for victims of reckless driving. Something like that. And really, the only downside I can think of here is the off chance that members of the street racing community might try and buy back their buddies' confiscated cars at auction, which would keep this Ouroboros of irresponsibility well fed, which, to be fair, is a pretty big downside and actually plausible, I would think. Taking that into consideration, I can kind of see why law enforcement would see this as the move, that destroying the cars is better than repurposing them in some way, because the people engaging in these sorts of activities aren't going to learn any other way. If these irresponsible, misbehaving drivers aren't going to grow up, then you need to start treating them like toddlers. But even in the case of toddlers, you tend to take away their toys or give away their toys, not destroy their toys altogether. Yet the punitive, almost retributive nature of this action against the offenders seems to be the point, as implied by Commissioner Kirkpatrick, who told the press, quote, "We can remind them that your prized possession can go away at a moment's notice if you put other people in harm's way. It's much like any of us. We all have our hobbies, our pet projects. But really, this is more hurtful to them if you take their vehicle, and now you're going to crush it." End quote. Now, on the one hand, I get how this is a bad thing. Those are perfectly good cars, although extensively modified, possibly even to an unrecognizable state. At the very least, you're not passing emissions with all these supercharged, straight-piped, cat-deleted, cold air intake-equipped, canyon-carving clown shoes. But in the grand scheme of things, they're just items, as capable of alteration as they were when they were transformed into the monstrosities they became, and as worthy of preservation as most other objects with even a modicum of potential use to the community at large. Yet, when you look at how frequent these acts of illegal driving have become and how frequent they've been over the decades, I kind of find myself wondering what choice these kinds of drivers have even given lawmakers. I mean, street racing isn't new, and neither is stunt driving, but I do feel like the rise of social media and the monetization thereof has created a clout culture that has elevated stunt driving to Darwinian levels. Seriously, just Google influencers arrested for stunt driving to see a collection of the absolute dumbest, clout-brained behavior you'll see this side of a high school cafeteria. People weaving in and out of traffic at ludicrous speeds, drivers destroying expensive cars doing jumps on residential streets, burnouts and donuts in crowded streets, ghosts riding the whip, standing on the hood at speed. What kind of moron convinced you that premature death maxing is something to do? You know, it'd be one thing if this were limited entirely to Las Vegas, because this type of activity is about as common there as overstimulated sports fans and under-maintained roads are here in the Keystone State. But, as it turns out, Las Vegas police aren't the only ones straight up destroying cars as part of a message to street racers. They're just among the few to actually make national news for it. Literally, just last August 2025, San Diego police destroyed a Toyota Chaser and a Yamaha R1 motorcycle as part of an initiative to curb street takeovers in the area. A month later, police in Louisville, Kentucky destroyed a 2021 Dodge Durango Hellcat that they confiscated from the 2024 Street Rod Nationals. And to that I just gotta kind of wonder, oh no, what's a fork doing in my kitchen? But much like in San Diego, the decision by Louisville officials to crush the car was intended to deter illegal street racing in the metro area. But, interestingly, in this case, people did complain, noting that this car could have been sold at auction rather than destroyed, right? Yeah, see, I'm not the only one thinking this. Except officials noted that, well, no, it couldn't be sold at auction, because it was equipped with more stolen parts than a plagiarist's autobiography. Up to and including the engine, which I take to mean that it was basically a ship of Theseus that no longer mechanically resembled its factory counterpart, and so returning it to stock and auctioning it off would have cost more money for the county than it would have brought in. But then that's just an assumption on my part. If nothing else, legislation does seem to be picking up across North America. And while I believe the Las Vegas law is the first that officially, legally mandates the destruction of these cars, our neighbors up north appear to have been the first to properly codify stunt driving legislation into law. As noted in a study by Canada's University of Western Ontario, a bill introduced in the province of Ontario made the definition fairly clear. Quote, stunt driving included the following activities: causing some or all tires to lose traction with the surface of the highway while turning, spinning tires or causing a vehicle to circle, lifting some or all tires from the surface of the highway, driving while the driver is not sitting in the driver's seat, preventing another vehicle from passing, driving two or more motor vehicles side by side where one of the motor vehicles occupies a lane for oncoming traffic, driving as close as possible to another vehicle, a pedestrian, or object without a reason, driving a motor vehicle on a highway with a connected nitrous oxide system, and driving 50 kilometers per hour over the speed limit. End quote. For what it's worth, I couldn't find any evidence that the penalties for breaking this law resulted in getting your car destroyed. But the other penalties should be pretty powerful deterrents, I would think, with fines of up to $10,000, 6 months in prison, a license suspension of up to 2 years, and a suspension of up to 10 years on the second conviction. But then people tend to ignore license suspensions anyway, so meh. And if they have the money to modify their cars to this extent, they can probably afford $10,000. Yet this study of Ontario street racing and stunt driving laws is still relevant to the decision some jurisdictions in the United States have made to crush these cars altogether. Because while discussing high school targeted education campaigns related to the legal risks and physical dangers of street racing and stunt driving, the authors of the study make the point that, quote, deterrence theory would also suggest that in order for the law to be effective in deterring the offenders, it has to be publicized and well enforced. End quote. And there you have it. I mean, is that not what car crushing accomplishes, at least in theory? Deterrence theory? It publicizes the law as a method of enforcement, since knowledge of the consequences might preclude the need to enforce the law as strictly. And it kind of makes sense because right now, Las Vegas task forces dedicated to busting up these street racing rings have led to literally dozens of arrests and the likely destruction of more cars than you could realistically call a press conference to crush. And while I think it's too soon to tell just what effect this deterrent might have on these rings, the premise behind doing this is sound, if for no other reason than that you're hitting these drivers in the wallet, right? Because maybe they do have $10,000 to pay the fines for breaking these laws, at least up in Ontario. But if you destroy the car, that's tens of thousands of dollars in expensive modifications, on top of the base cost of the car and its upkeep, all down the drain. And people perk up enough when consequences threaten their freedom. But when you're threatening their pocketbook in this economy, yeah, I get why they're doing this. But even disagreeing with the methods, I don't know that I can disagree with the notion that it's necessary. I'm sure there's a non-trivial chance you might have clicked on this video with the expectation that I would rail against police overreach or government overreach or whatever you'd call it when the man decides to impound your cube and then give you 30 minutes to move it. And considering all the hand-wringing I did about cash for clunkers way back when, you'd think I would hate this on principle. That I would hate that two enthusiast cars were mangled beyond recognition just to serve as the automotive equivalent of heads on the pikes outside the Red Keep. But I do wonder how many chances these drivers, or at the very least drivers like them, were given. How many got off with fines, with temporary license suspensions, with the expensive, though temporary, impounding of their cars? How many were given lax prison sentences that saw them free within whichever season they went in? Obviously, people drive on suspended licenses every single day. People pay to get their cars out of the impound lot every single day. People commit crimes, they go to prison, and they reoffend all the time. And that's true, but while I'm sure you can make the case that people who have their cars crushed will simply go buy another car and start the process all over again, I've got to believe that the financial toll will eventually make it so that monetary necessity overrides whatever desire they might have to act like a moron on public roads. Yet, at the risk of sounding like the most boring square on car tube, I feel like these types of drivers are ruining car culture. That this clout-brained attitude where we load up a car with as many disruptive modifications as possible in the name of drawing attention to ourselves at the expense of others' peace and safety is legitimately embarrassing. You can appreciate an incredible build with all the modifications and tunes for horsepower, torque, handling, ride quality, appearance, whatever. They can be as loud and outlandish as you want. You can take them to car shows. You can peacock within the bounds of the car shows you take them to, provided you aren't being a complete menace. But if you're going to drive like a maniac, go do it on a track. Go do it on a closed course or on a private road. Don't do it on public roads in the middle of traffic. Don't shut down streets and block traffic. You're putting people in danger and you're making other people paint car enthusiasts with the same wide brush. And for what? The smallest huff of acceptance from strangers? For pats on the backs from friends? Look, I'm not saying life is easy or even that it's fair, and I'm definitely not saying you can't enjoy yourself or the things you worked hard to earn. But seriously, there has to be some sense of personal responsibility in how we operate our cars, doesn't there? I mean, people will legitimately act as though because they aren't under the influence when they do it, that they aren't doing anything wrong. And while people who aren't actively engaging in this sort of behavior aren't likely to be affected by any of this, unless you're one of the unfortunate few to run afoul of a street takeover, all of it still speaks to how automotive enthusiasts are viewed by communities and their law enforcement. How people twist their underwear over car shows and meets in their town. How police are out in force to meet these types of events. How much insurance organizers have to take out in the first place as a bulwark against the stupidity of people who act like every Lowe's parking lot is a stage in burnout paradise. It is tough all over. And you know, hang on, I'm gonna be an old man for a minute. I remember a time, okay, when car enthusiasts kind of had the benefit of the doubt. The presumption that there were more good apples among us than bad. And it was expected that bad apples could be reformed through impounding, fines, or license suspensions in extreme cases, or prison in the most unthinkable extremes. I just feel like there was this assumption that you would learn your lesson if the punishment was fair, that you were capable of learning while still keeping access to the vehicles you used to break the law. Or maybe I'm just naive and I haven't read enough news stories of all the times this has happened over the course of my waking life. Maybe enthusiasts never had the benefit of the doubt. Maybe enthusiasts have always been subjected to suspicious eyes. But I will say that it definitely feels like there are a lot more police checkpoints now. We see police more active in places they weren't before. And maybe that's a bigger conversation, but I do think that at a certain point, law enforcement and legislators realized that fines weren't going to cut it anymore, and neither would an impound lot. Thrill seekers and clout chasers were more than symptoms of a disease. If you want to look at it in medicine terms, they were kind of more of the metastasis of a far worse social condition. And it's this, that at any given time, we are the main character of our world. And that means the things we want to do come before the peace or safety of anybody else who isn't us or the people we're trying to impress. And I'm sorry, but if that's how you feel, how you think, then maybe try growing up. But what do you think? Is destroying cars a justifiable consequence for criminals who don't appear to learn anything from all the other times that they've been busted by law enforcement? Or is this a gross overreaction and a misuse of resources that could potentially be made to work for the community? Seriously, I want to hear your opinions. Let's chat in the comments. And be on the lookout for my screen name. It's Limited Time Roman. And if you like the show and want to see more of it, like, comment, subscribe, share the video, or join us on Patreon for just $1, where you'll get exclusive content and receive videos early and ad-free, such as my new 2-hour RCR stories on the complete history of the drive-in movie theater. I'm still not sure when that's coming out on the main channel, but if you want it without any ad interruptions or anything like that while still supporting the channel, hit us up on Patreon. But ultimately, your viewership is enough, and I want to thank you for it. Thank you so much for watching, and have an outstanding rest of your week.